Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And once again, we are truly blessed in an awesome way in matters of the Shabbat itself, in matters of our calling and being invited by the Most High in their plan of salvation. And it certainly is a blessing that we are involved in this series as we will engage in part 3 of the Testament of Yoseph. And it's a blessing what Yah has inspired, what they have led me to see, not only for what is being understood as we read these chapters that I will introduce, but what it means for also for the last days, because these are prophecies. It's not just a history, it's history of the past and also for us today in the present. It's history, what we are seeing, what we are experiencing under the conditions of the world today. And so let us offer up our hearts and minds in prayer, and I will make some statements, to introduce what I desire for people to relate to, in order for them to be blessed and benefited as a result of being a part of this series and a result of being actively involved. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before your throne, your presence, and it's a privilege and an honor that you allow us in your presence, in the presence of you and your Son. And we look up to you, Father, because you are the supreme head over the universe, and you are the source of everything that we are to learn in this life, because we are created and made to be in your image and likeness. And through your Son, Yeshua, you made it possible for us to have salvation. And so we thank you now, Father, for this study and the inspiration of it and what you have designated in this series. And we ask, Father, for your blessing in the name of our Savior and soon coming King Yehoshua. And we say, hallelujah, amen. Hallelujah, hallelujah, amen. All right. So before we actually get involved in the chapters that I will announce, I always like to encourage those that get on the broadcast, live that is, they get on the broadcast, to consider taking notes, because none of us remember everything, every detail anyway, but it will benefit you in later, when you want to review, if you go back to review. And like I said, to encourage you to write notes because it keeps you actively involved. And so let me announce right now also the subject matter. This is a part 3, and its title is the Testament of Yoseph, whom you know as Joseph, for those that may be new. And I say Yoseph because there is no letter J in the Hebrew alphabet, which only has 22 letters, whereas you know that the English alphabet has 26. So there's no letter J, so his true name is with the Y sound. Yoseph is how you spell Yosef. And so now the theme scriptures that we will study today, it will be Genesis 45, beginning, Genesis 45, verses 1 through 28. And then after that, it'll be Genesis 46, 1 through 34. And then sometime after that, it will be Genesis 47, 1 through 31. So I'll just repeat it quickly. Genesis 45, 1 through 28. Genesis 46, 1 through 34. And Genesis 47, 1 through 31. And of course, as we go along, there will be some other, obviously, reference scriptures. And as you know, this type of ministry, we study the Hebrew and we study the Greek out of the Hebrew dictionary and concordance, as well as the Greek dictionary and concordance. So let me begin by sharing with you where we left off in Genesis 44. when we close out the teaching last Sabbath, I just like to make a reference to what Yehuda was saying to his family, and looking at Genesis 44. And he made this statement. He says, how shall I go up to my father? And the lad, which he was referring to Benjamin, be not with me. It says, lest peradventure, which means perhaps, he says, see the evil that shall come on my father. Meaning Yaakov. His father, as Jacob, is Yaakov in the Hebrew. And so I close out last Shabbat when I said, none of the brothers and Yaakov knew Yosef was alive and ruling in Egypt under Pharaoh. I'll just repeat that one statement there. None of the brothers and Yaakov knew that Yosef was alive and ruling in Egypt under Pharaoh. So now we'll begin. Chapter 45. My heading says, Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. So finally, they're going to learn about him. All right. He reveals himself to his brothers. Beginning in verse 1 now, it says this. Then you'll see it as Joseph, obviously, in the King James English. But then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them. And the word refrain in the Hebrew, number 662, means he could not hold back or restrain himself. So when it says refrain, you have a better understanding of what it means in the Hebrew. He could not hold back nor restrain himself before all them. And that stood by him. And he cried. Let's continue as we continue. And he cried, and he makes this statement, cause every man to go out from me. So what he was saying when he says cause every man, he was referring to the Egyptians because they were always with him, the Egyptian people, all right, the soldiers, whatever. So he says, cause every man to go out from me, to leave the room. And there stood no man or no one with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brethren or his brothers. Okay, so only his brothers now are with him. Verse 2, and he wept aloud. And the term wept aloud, number 6963 in the Hebrew, 6963 is the number in the Hebrew, wept aloud. In other words, aloud with a great voice. Aloud with a great voice. And wept aloud with a great voice from himself. And the Egyptians, when he began to do that, the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard, in a different location outside of that room that he was with his brothers. All right. They heard he was, weeping so loud. Now, verse 3, it says, and Yosef said to his brethren, his brothers, I am Yosef. Does my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer. Now think about that. He's revealing and saying who he is. They didn't know who he was, and I'll explain that in later. And he's asking the question, and then it says they could not answer him, for they were troubled. Look at that verse. I'm reading in verse 3. For they were troubled. And in the Hebrew, the word troubled, number 926 in the Hebrew, can be better understood when they said troubled. They were terrified. Think about that. They were terrified with great fear. Then it says at the end of verse 3, at his presence. All right. So now he's, like I said, he's revealing himself. Now, verse 4. So Joseph said to his brethren, his brothers, come near to me, I pray you. And they came there. And he says, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. So he's disclosing what they had done, sold into Egypt. Now, verse 5. Now, therefore, now notice what he says now. Be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves. The word grieved in the Hebrew 6087, it means in emotional pain. He's telling his brothers this. Be not grieved in your emotional pain, nor angry. The word angry is 2734 in the Hebrew, nor be angry. So 2734 in the Hebrew, it can be understood as bothered or vexed, vexed or bothered with yourselves, though, that you sold me here. Now, Yah gave me an explanation of this when I was reading this particular verse. You have to consider what was really going on. It was Yah's purpose and plan to use Yoseph to picture Elohim for the last days. That's what you need to see about that explanation. When he's telling his brothers, don't be angry about what they had done. He's explaining to them, Yah was setting it up. I repeat, it was Yah's purpose and plan to use Yoseph to picture the Elohim for the last days. All right. He says, so when he says not be angry, so that you sold me here. And then he makes this statement for God, it says in the King James English, that's number 430 that I always refer to in the Hebrew. It's the Elohim. When you see the number 430 over God, it's the Elohim. It was the Elohim that sent me before you, ahead of you, to preserve life. That word preserve life is number 4241 in the Hebrew. It can be understood when it says preserve life, means to sustain it, to sustain the life. Now, verse 6, for these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and yet there are 5 years more, in which there shall neither be airing or harvest. So let me explain that. The term airing is number 2758 in the Hebrew, 2758. Airing means there shall not be any plowing when people work their farmland to plow. Nor harvest is number 7105 in the Hebrew. And that term, harvest 7105, can be understood as reaping. So what is being explained, you're not going to be able to plow and you're not going to be able to reap anything as far as your need for food, okay? For the next 5 years, he was saying. Now, verse 7. So God, or Elohim, 430, sent me. So notice what he's saying now, verse 7. Elohim sent me before you, ahead of you, to preserve you a posterity in the earth. So posterity is not a term that we necessarily use. That's number 7611 in the Hebrew. When you see the word posterity, it means remnant. A people left over, a remnant, to preserve a remnant in the earth from you, and to save your lives, as we continue in verse 7, to save your lives in the Hebrew is 2421. It means to keep alive. Save your lives means to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So when he made the statement about a great deliverance, Yah led me to a reference to understand what the great deliverance means, to look in the New Testament now in Luke chapter 21, beginning in verses 8 through 12. So look at that as a reference when he says for a great deliverance. The reference is Luke 21, beginning there, and then following some more verses after that, but 8 through 12 to start with. So now I'm in the New Testament. I've turned there myself, Luke 21, and looking at, excuse me, the verses 8 through 12 to start with. All right. So verse 8 says this. Now, Yeshua is teaching this. That's what you need to see in this particular set of verses, 8 through 12. And he said, take heed. Take heed means to be forewarned that you be not deceived. For many shall come in my name, to represent Yeshua, saying that I am the Messiah, or it says Christ there, I am the Messiah. Many will be saying that of him, and that the time draws near. He says, the time is drawing near, but go you not therefore after them. Don't follow their lead. You don't follow, don't go after them. But verse 9, and when you hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by, which means immediately. It's not immediately the end. Now, verse 10, then said he to them, Yeshua is still teaching this, nation shall rise against nation. That term nation, number 1484 in the Greek now. 1484 in the Greek. When you see the term nation, it means race. You know, we have races of people on the earth. We call it the black race or the white race or the yellow race or whatever term you are wanting to use in these modern days. Race shall rise against race, though. And then it says kingdom against kingdom. That's 932 in the Greek. And kingdom has to do with the governments of this world. The ruling governments will be against each other. All right. Now, verse 11, and great earthquakes shall be in different places. Diverse means different places. And then it says, and famines and pestilences. And then it says, when it says pestilences, in the Greek, that's 3061. The term pestilences, so you better understand, have a better understanding, means plagues and diseases. So when it says pestilences, it's really referring to plagues and diseases. Now, you and I know that we experience that now. We see all over the place these conditions. And then it says, and fearful sights. So in verse 11, and great signs shall there be from heaven. So the signs are coming from heaven. Okay. And then it says in verse 12, but before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you. Well, I meant to make this statement as I was reading verse 11 about pestilences. In other words, the term pestilences, besides meaning plagues and diseases, it means it will be spreading deadly diseases to every location, like spreading deadly diseases everywhere. So verse 12, as I was reading that, before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues. All right. Those were places that people would come to for worship. And then it says, and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, the sake of Yeshua's name of authority, my name's sake. So that was verse 12. All right, as a reference. Also, going forward in the same chapter, look at now verse 25. 25 through 28. This is all a part of the reference. Verse 25 says this, Yeshua is still teaching, all right? And there shall be signs in the sun, sun in the sky, and in the moon, and in the stars, these signs, and upon the earth distress of nations, between the races. Nations mean races, with perplexity. That word perplexity is number 640 in the Greek. And perplexity can be better understood as to be uncertain in doubt and how to proceed in your life. Perplexity can be better understood as uncertain in having doubt and how to proceed. All right, in the Greek. Now, the sea and the waves, it says, are roaring. Look at verse 26 now. Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. When it says this, men's hearts failing them, that's why you and I are seeing and witnessing in these last days right now heart attacks. Men's hearts failing means heart attacks. For the fear and for looking after those things, dealing with it, that are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. The powers of the heavens shall be shaken, what you're going to see in the sky. And then verse 27, it says, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Verse 28, and when these things begin, he says, Yeshua is teaching this, begin to come to pass, then look up. So notice what he says. Then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. Now, to look up means to look up into the sky. Look up and you're going to notice some things. And lift up your heads, for your redemption is number 629 in the Greek. 629 can be better understood as deliverance. So your redemption means your deliverance is actually drawing near. And then there's more going forward in this chapter to verse 34 now. How many times we've had to read these few verses in verse 34 to 36. Notice this now. Yeshua is still teaching this whole chapter. He says, and take heed, meaning take warning to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting. Now, that's a strange word, even in its spelling. But when I looked it up in the Greek dictionary, number 2897, 2897, the word overcharged with surfeiting. Surfeiting means headaches. And people experience, you know that today, headaches. And then it says, and drunkenness and the cares of this life. You're so involved with the cares of this life, so that the day will come upon you unaware. You're so involved in the cares of your life, you're not able to pay attention to the signs. You're unaware of it. Now, verse 35, for as a snare means a trap, just like a trap, shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. So all these conditions that Yeshua was relating to, it's going to impact the whole planet. Every nation, in other words, that's why it says this, on them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Now, verse 36 is an important verse that we've studied many times in the past. Watch you, therefore. In other words, you better pay attention. You watch, therefore, and pray always. You're going to need to pray to the Most High, and seek help, that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before or in the presence of the Son of Man. So look what Yeshua is saying, what we need to do in the last days. We need to emphasize for us to pray. always. Was don't give up in praying and reaching out to the Most High to seek their help and their deliverance, their redemption, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. So there is an opportunity in the last days for individuals that Yah is calling, inviting into his kingdom realm to escape what is going to happen on the earth. We can't stop anything. It's going to happen. These are prophecies, though. All right. So now I read that reference, going back now to Genesis 45, when Joseph or Yosef, Joseph that you know as, I call him Yosef, is his Hebrew, he began to make himself known to his brothers, to his family, and to his father. All right. Now, I left off in verse 7. Now, verse 8. So now, look what else he says to his family. So now, it was not you, he's saying this to his brothers, that sent me here. In other words, when he was sold into Egypt. So look what he reveals. He says, but it was God. From number 430 of the Elohim. It was the Elohim, in other words, that sent him. All right. And he has made me, as we continue in verse 8, he has made me a father to Pharaoh. Okay, so that's interesting. Making him a father to Pharaoh. All right. The word father in the Hebrew, it literally the number is one. It's the first definition in the Hebrew dictionary as well as the concordance. The term father. It literally can be understood when it says father, a head, meaning a head of a family, or a spiritual father. Both. You are physically a head of a family, but you are also to be understood as a spiritual father. All right. So Joseph was made a head and a spiritual father even to the Pharaoh. That's what you need to see. And it says, and Lord. The word Lord is 113 in the Hebrew, means master. He has made me master of all his house. That term house is 1004 in the Hebrew that we study many a times, Banah. Banah, 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 it means family. So it was all of Pharaoh's family. And a ruler, he's made him also a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Now look at verse 9. So haste you, in other words, hurry up and go up to my father. He's saying that to his brothers now because he revealed himself as to who he was. His father, of course, is Jacob, as you know, Jacob and Yaakov. And say to him, thus says your son, Joseph or Yosef, God has made me Lord. That's the same number, 113, master. He has made me master of all Egypt. Come down to me and tarry not. Don't delay. Tarry means don't delay. All right. And so don't delay. Come down to me. And so think about what's going on here. Joseph is the son of Yaakov, right? He's revealing himself who he is. But what you need to understand, come down to me. Don't delay. He's made me the Lord or master in Egypt. Think about it this way. El can purpose a son to be over a parent, believe it or not. A son to be over a parent as a destiny for salvation. This is what you need to understand when it says that he's made him Lord of all in Egypt. And he's telling his family to come to him, even his father. And so the position that Joseph is in is to be understood that El can even purpose a son to be over a parent, a father and a mother, as a destiny, though, for salvation, though. for their salvation. All right, now verse 10. And you shall dwell in the land of Goshen. It's a specific territory, an area in Egypt. Dwell, live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, near to Joseph, you and your children. He's sending this message to his father Jacob. You and your children and your children's children, meaning his grandchildren. Jacob's children, his sons and daughters, and his grandchildren. And your flocks, having your flocks with you, and your herds, and all that you have. All right? All that you have. So that was verse 10. In other words, also, this is a prophecy to be understood. This is also about the families being brought together to be fulfilled in the last days, though, by Yeshua and his wife. Let me repeat that. You need to understand when he's telling Jacob, his father, you and your children and your children's children, meaning the whole family, and what you own or your possessions, this is also to be fulfilled in the last days by Yeshua and his wife. And you'll see that later as we go along in other verses. Now, verse 11, and there will I nourish you. That word nourish can be also understood, number 3557, 3557 in the Hebrew. It means feed you. I will nourish you means to feed them. And for yet, why? Because yet there are 5 years of famine remaining. In other words, 5 years of famine remaining. And he says, for him to feed them, it says, lest you, if you don't come, but if lest you and your household or your family and all that you have come to poverty. That's what it will come to if you don't come. It will come to poverty. Poverty in the Hebrew, number 3423. 3423 means ruin. Coming to poverty, it'll come into ruin. Now, verse 12. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that is in my mouth that speaks to you. It is I. In other words, the eyes that you see and the eyes of my brother Benjamin. And he was really saying that to Judah, to explain it. That's why he says, your eyes see and my brother, that it is my mouth, meaning my mouth, Joseph, that is speaking to you now. Now, verse 13. So you shall tell my father, that's what he's saying to his family, especially Judah. All right. You shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt. The word glory is 3519 in the Hebrew. 3519 means honor. Tell my father of all my honor in Egypt, because he's the governor. He's the second most powerful man in Egypt under the Pharaoh. And of all that you have seen, in my presence, you shall haste. Haste means in the Hebrew 4116. 4116 means hurry. You shall haste or hurry to do this in a hurried way, and bring down my father here. Bring him here. And then verse 14 says, and he fell, that is Yosef, fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck. Now, don't forget, he hadn't seen him in 20 years or so. He hadn't seen his brother Benjamin. All right. He fell upon his brother's Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept also, in other words, upon his neck. Now, think about this reunion. You haven't seen a family member that you care for and love for numbers of years, and now you're reunited all of a sudden, and you're together to be in each other's company and presence. they were in tears. They, in other words, they were embracing each other. All right, verse 14. Now, verse 15. Moreover, he, Joseph, kissed all his brethren or his brothers, the rest of them, in other words, and wept upon them. So think about it. First, he's weeping with his brother Benjamin, and then because they both have the same mother and father, they're united that way. All right, they have the same father Jacob and the same mother Rachel. Okay, so they're weeping upon each other that way. But then he now embraces also the rest of the brothers. That's why he says in verse 15, he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And then after that, his brethren began to talk with him. Now they're communicating, right? Now, verse 16, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. Well, fame, we may think of it as famous. We think fame is famous. No, it doesn't mean that. It's number 6963 in the Hebrew. The fame should have been used as a voice. In other words, and the voice thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, well, Joseph's brethren have come, and it pleased Pharaoh well. Good. He was joyful about it. And also his servants, the Egyptians, they were pleased about it. Now, verse 17. And Pharaoh says to Joseph, say to your brothers, this do this, laid your beast. Now, we don't talk like that, okay? Laid. And it doesn't make sense when you see the word laid, but in the Hebrew, 2943 means to load. Load your beasts, your animals that you have with you. Load up the supplies that's being supplied by Joseph to go. And go, it says, and get you to the land of Canaan. Return there. That's where his father and the rest of the family are. Verse 18, and take your father and your households, plural. That's 1004, but not your families, in other words. Take your households means take all your families and come to me, Joseph says. And this is still verse 18, I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat. That term fat, 2459 in the Hebrew. 2459 means the best. You shall eat the best of the land. All right, which is going to be in Goshen. Now, verse 19. Now you are commanded. This do it. Follow through on it. Take your new wagons out of the land of Egypt. In other words, he's being given wagons. The brothers are given wagons, and out of the land of Egypt, it's going to be for your little ones, the rest of your family and your little ones, and for your wives, and bring your father and return. Come means, come back, return. So they're given wagons and supplies for them to return and bring the families. Now, verse 20. And regard not it says stuff. All right. The word regard, 5869 in the Hebrew. 5869. Also, regard can be better understood is desire. Also, desire, not your stuff, though. The word stuff can be understood as ornaments or just general things, your stuff. For the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. The good will be in Goshen, the best of the land, okay? Now, verse 21, and the children of Israel did so. So they followed Joseph's instructions. They did so. And Joseph gave them wagons. See, that's where the wagons came from. He gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was involved, you know, to help Joseph to get his family back, out of the land of Canaan and to bring them to Egypt. So Pharaoh was involved. See, Joseph and the Pharaoh had a special, which you need to understand. Remember the previous chapters we read? They had a special relationship. Remember how Pharaoh was given all these dreams, and then Joseph was brought out of the prison to interpret the dreams, and Pharaoh put a ring on his finger of authority and made him the governor because the dreams were given by Yah to the Pharaoh in order to allow for the famine, and through the dreams, allow for the famine, and Joseph was going to be used to save Egypt. To save Egypt under the authority of Pharaoh. Okay, and he being the governor. So he had, once again, Pharaoh is giving the wagons and giving it to Joseph to bring his family. And then it says in verse 21, I'm reading that, the commandment, it was the commandment of Pharaoh, but gave them provision for the way. The word way is 1870, means journey, the journey. So they were going to be supplied provision for their needs for the journey because the famine was also in Canaan. So to provide for them and then bring them to Egypt. Now, verse 22. And to all of them, look at this statement. He, meaning Joseph, now is doing this. Joseph, to all of them, meaning the family, he gave each man changes of raiment. Raiment means clothes, all right? A supply of clothing, all right? But to Benjamin, look what he does. He gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing, of raiment. So he is blessing his brother Benjamin with more supplies than the rest of the brothers. More supplies. He's blessing his brother Benjamin. Five changes of clothing. Now, verse 23. And to his father he sent after this manner. It says 10 asses, which means donkeys. You can understand as donkeys. Laden, which means loaded with the good things of Egypt that they were sending, and 10 she asses also loaded with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way, or for the journey. By the way means the journey, for the journey to come to Egypt. So they sent, in other words, Joseph sent a number of items. So there were actually 20 asses or 20 donkeys with all these supplies for their travel, for their coming back to Egypt. Now, verse 24. And he sent his brethren away, his brothers, and they departed. And he said to them, see that you fall not out of the way. All right. In other words, the word fall not out of the way, that's number 7264 in the Hebrew. That you fall not out of the way. The way is the journey. 7264, fall not, means not to be disturbed. Don't allow yourself to be disturbed or to be shaken by the conditions that exist. That you be not disturbed nor shaken through the conditions that you're experiencing. And by the way of your journey, that is, the way is number 1870 in the Hebrew. That means it does mean the journey, but it also means your path and your destiny. Your path and your destiny, not just about the journey. Now, verse 25. And they went up out of Egypt and came into, now they're returning back to the land of Canaan, into the land of Canaan, to Yaakov their father. So they come back home in the land of Canaan to their father, because they're supposed to bring him and the rest of the family to Egypt. Now, verse 26, and they told him, saying, Joseph is yet or still alive. Imagine Jacob after all those years thinking that Joseph was deceased and killed by an animal, that the brothers lied about that and sold him into Egypt. Imagine all those years. Joseph is, he says, is yet alive, told him that, and he is the governor of all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted when he was hearing this from his sons. His heart fainted. And the word fainted in the Hebrew, 6313, 6313, when it says fainted, it can be understood as he was stunned, like you're in shock. He was stunned, for he had believed them not. He didn't believe them based on the past experience of their lies, of his son's lies. Okay, now verse 27. So they told him all the words of Yosef, which he had said to them, his sons. And when he, that's Yaakov, saw the wagons, though, the supplies that were sent, you know, 20 wagons actually full of items. And the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, to carry his father, the spirit of Yaakov, their father, revived. Now he's beginning to see that there is his son Joseph alive with a tremendous office of a governor under the Pharaoh of Egypt. And now he's realizing that it's true. And Israel said in verse 28 now, the final verse of this chapter, Israel says this, it is enough. It is sufficient. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. All right. So you will notice that at times when we're reading some of these verses, it makes reference to Yaakov under the name and heading Israel, because that has a function and a purpose of a prophecy in the last days as well. Okay. That's why every now and then you don't see the name Jacob or Yaakov, you see the name Israel. He was given that name representing the Elohim. All right, so now we've completed chapter 45 when he took the time, Joseph took the time to reveal himself to his brothers, to his family. Now, chapter 46, as we cover this chapter now. In chapter 46 is going to be verses 1 through 34. So let's start beginning verse 1. My heading says Yaakov and his family move to Egypt. So verse 1. Now notice what it says. And Israel took his journey. Remember I was saying, oftentimes you'll see the name Israel in place of Yaakov because it has a future destiny, why the term Israel is used. So, and Israel took his journey, and with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God, or says God is 430, sacrifices to the Elohim of his father Isaac. He offered sacrifices, and it could have been um, peace offerings, or it could have been burnt offerings, whatever, sacrifices. That's what they did in the ancient times. Sacrifices, animal sacrifices as well. All right. To Elohim of his father Isaac, it says. That's verse 1. Now verse 2. And Elohim, now look what Elohim does. Number 430 says God, but it's Elohim. And Elohim spoke to Israel in the visions of the night. You see this? Now, this is prophetic also. But in the visions of the night, he visits. In other words, the Elohim visited Israel, or as you know, as Jacob, in the visions of the night and said, notice what he says now. He says, Jacob, Jacob. That's his human name. All right. Jacob, Jacob. And he says, well, here am I. All right. The word visions, I wanted to define for you. That's 4759. The visions of the night, 4759 in the Hebrew. It can be understood as supernatural revelations. The visions of the night is while he sleep. All right. Supernatural revelations, the visions of the night, while he was asleep. Now, verse 3, and he said, that is of the Elohim, he says, I am God. El in the singular. I am God. The God, now when it says the God, that's the plural. So I am God, representing of the God 430 of the Elohim family. So that's really Yehovah that's speaking this. I am God of the God or Elohim of your father. Fear not to go down into Egypt. He's revealing this to Israel or Yaakov in the visions of the night. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will there make of you, Yaakov, a great nation. Think about that. That great nation is Israel. All right. And verse 4, he keeps saying I, because he's the supreme creator. He is the authority. They are the authority, the Father and the Son. So I got all that circled. Every time he said I circled it in red. Verse 4, I will go down with you, Israel, into Egypt. I'm going to be with you. And I will also surely bring you up again. And Yoseph shall put his hand upon your eyes. Now, Yaakov was older, okay? And his eyes were failing, as far as going blind, so to speak, eventually, completely blind eventually. But he says, surely, when he says this in verse 4, I will also surely bring you up again. The word, that phrase, 5927 in the Hebrew, bring you up. It gives it twice, 5927 twice. It's a double, and that's very important. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word is established. It repeats the numbers twice, 5927. It literally means bring you up, means to ascend. Now think about that term. Ascend means to go up to the heavens. That's what is being revealed to Yosef, to Israel, or to Jacob in a dream, in the visions of the night. I will bring you up means to ascend. And Yosef, then it's the rest of the verse 4, and Yosef shall put his hand upon your eyes. Remember I said his eyes, he was failing in his vision, physically speaking. Verse 5, so Yaakov rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel, that's his family, that's his sons of Israel, they had to carry him, okay, in the wagons, carried Yaakov, their father, and their little ones, because that was a long trip. That was a distance from the land of Canaan to go to Egypt, and their little ones. So they would be in the wagons, and their wives also would be in the wagons. It says that their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him, meaning Yaakov. He's the head of his family. all right, to carry him. That's verse 5. Now, look what Pharaoh was. Pharaoh was directly involved in a lot of this situation, all right, because of the relationship that he had with Joseph. Now, verse 6. So they took their cattle and their goods, which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, where they were from, and they came into Egypt. What it says there, Yaakov and all his seed. So now it's talking about his heritage, his seed, his children and his children's children, the offsprings, in other words. That's what the word seed in the Hebrew is 2233 in the Hebrew. 2233. It means your offspring, your of the future generations and descendants. With the seed was to be with Israel as Yaakov. Now, I have a commentary based on that verse, verse 6, and I want you to hear the commentary. All Yaakov's family, as Israel, though, were required by Yah to live in Egypt. Remember, he had to give them visions of the night to tell them, don't be afraid to go. To live in Egypt with Yoseph, though, under his authority, Joseph's authority. Remember the previous verses I said he was the son of Yaakov, and Yah was designating Joseph to be in charge of his own father, that the father would be under Joseph's authority. Yah can do anything. They can decide anything. It's not only sometimes the parents that are in charge, sometimes the children will be in charge. They will be in a position to be under the authority. You see, the parents will be in a position to be under the authority of some certain situations of a son or a daughter or whatever, especially if they have a position of authority. He is the governor of all Egypt. If it's a daughter, she could be a queen, like Esther was, that you read about in the land of Persia, okay, as a queen, as authority. All right. So think of it that way. That's why I'm saying what I'm saying. I repeat, under the inspiration of the Most High, I'm making this commentary. All Yaakov's family, as Israel, were required by Yah to live in Egypt with Joseph under his authority. Now, verse 7. So his sons and his sons' sons, that's the grandchildren, with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. That's the daughters and the granddaughters. All right. And all his seed, that is the offspring of his heritage, brought Yaakov, with him into Egypt, because he was led by Yah's spirit and led by Yah himself to not be afraid to go into Egypt. So they came into Egypt now, verse 7. Now, verse 8, the whole family, children and children's children. These are the names. Now, watch this. Verse 8, these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Yaakov and his sons. Now, we've got to follow this list. It's very important. There's meaning behind all this list. Yaakov and his sons, and begins to list them. Reuben, it says, Yaakov's firstborn. He was the firstborn of he and Leah. All right. Then it says in verse 9, and the sons of Reuben, so it would be Yaakov's grandchildren, Hanak, Phalu, Hezron, Carmi. So it lists Reuben's 4 sons. Then it says in verse 10, and the sons of Simeon. See, he is the second born. And it says Jamul and Jamin, or it can be Yumul with the Y, and Yamin, and Ohad, and Yakin, and Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanitish woman. Shaul. All right. Remember Shaul, he became King Saul later. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Now, verse 11. And thus now it lists the sons of Levi. He's the third born. All right. And so the sons of Levi was Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So list these three sons of Levi. Continuing in verse 12. Now look at this list. The sons of Judah, as you see it there, is Yehuda in the Hebrew with the Y sound. Yehuda. Now watch now this special understanding about these names. And Onan and Shelah and Phares and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. Now, I got a reference when I was reading in this verse about Phares and Zerah. The reference is Genesis 38. We're in Genesis 46 right now, right? Genesis 38, verses 24 through 30. I've got to read this to you. Who Phares and Zerah were. Okay. All right. So hold your place in Genesis 46, put a marker there. Let's look at Genesis 38. We have to go back a number of chapters here. Genesis 38 is this history of and Onan. And then also the Phares and Zerah. Okay, who they were. So Genesis 38, as I'm turning back myself, and we're going to pick it up in verse 24. Look at this account. Genesis 38, verse 24. It says this. Verse 24, and it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told to Judah or Yehuda, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot because she became pregnant, you see, and also she is with child by whoredom, though, they said. Whoredom, you know, committing harlotry. So she's pregnant, right? Tamar. So Yehuda said, well, bring her forth and let her be burnt. That was a judgment. Let her be put to death under fire. Anybody in Israel that committed whoredom, especially they were harder on the female than on the men. But look at this statement, let her be burnt. When she brought forth, verse 25, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these items, in other words, these items means items, are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray you. She's saying this to Judah, all right, her father-in-law, right? Discern, I pray you, whose items are these? The signet and the bracelets and the staff. Here's the story and the shock. Judah had to acknowledge those items because she had, those items, because those items were his. Those 3 items that she mentioned. In other words, she became pregnant when she covered her face, when he was on a trip with Levi to a different land. And the reason is, in verse 26, Judah acknowledged because she had been more righteous than I, he says, than himself, because I gave her not to Shelah. That was the third born son. And he knew her again no more sexual intimacy, by the way. And then it says in verse 27, as I'm reading this account, in verse 27, it says, and it came to pass in the time of her travail that behold, twins were in her womb. That's why the history of mankind were millions of twins that were born. Okay? Not thousands, millions. All right? Twins were in her womb. And it came to pass in verse 28 when she travailed that one put out his hand as she's given birth, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand, the first one that's coming out, a scarlet thread, saying, well, this came out first. But look what happens. Verse 29. And it came to pass. Now look at what happens. As he drew back his hand, with the scarlet thread that the midwife put on him, behold, his brother came out. The other twin, his brother came out. And that's why his name was that was being applied. And she said, well, how have you broken forth to come out first? This breach be upon you. This breach, situation be upon you. Therefore, his name was called Phares. So Zara was supposed to be born first with the red thread on his finger, but actually Phares came out first. All right, and that's why they gave him the name Phares, because he came out first ahead of his brother. And then verse 30, and then afterward, after all this is coming about, came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zara. Now this is all happening to Yehuda, who had an intimate relationship with his daughter-in-law that he didn't know was his daughter-in-law, named Tamar. He didn't know it. Okay, so he got caught. He got caught in his sin. In his sin, Yehuda. Now, I've got some more information going back, because you're going to learn about and Onan, the other son. So going back to chapter 46, where we left off, when I needed to cover these verses. And I should have had you hold your place. I'm sorry. In chapter 38, because we're going to learn about and Onan. I wanted to cover about Phares and Zara, the twin sons. But going back, I should have told you to hold your place, because there's other verses in that chapter in the beginning. So in chapter 38, we're going to look at verses 7 through 10. Previous chapters. We're going to learn about these other two sons, and Onan, why they were deceased. So look at verse 7 now. Chapter 38, we're still there before we go back to chapter 46. Yehuda's firstborn. Are you seeing this? Verse 7. Was wicked in the sight of the Lord. That's the common and famous number 3068 in the Hebrew, which is Yehovah. When you see that word Lord, he was wicked in the sight, what Yehovah was observing about him. And look at this statement. The Lord, 3068, Yehovah, slew him, slew He was wicked. In other words, he put him to death. Yah does not play games with human beings. Yah is supreme. They will bless you, bring you into existence, and all of that. But when you go against the Torah instructions and their commandments, Yah themselves, or the Elohim themselves, will put a human being to death. And that's what they did with He was wicked, right? That's verse 7. They put him to death. They slew him, put him to death. Now verse 8. So Yehuda said, now, He's responding to the death of his firstborn. Yehuda said to Onan, he's the secondborn. All right. Go into your brother's wife. Okay. That meant go into your brother's wife was usually to raise up seed, to carry on the name of the brother. Usually that's the rules in the Torah. So he tells Onan to go in to your brother's wife, that was Tamar, and marry her in marriage and raise up seed to your brother. That was the rule in the land of Israel. Raise up seed. So look what Onan does. Verse 9. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, but it was the seed that she would give birth as a son would be in the name of his brother. Okay. He knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in to Tamar, that is his brother's wife, he spilled it on the ground. Are you seeing this? Lest he should give seed to his brother. He spilled it on the ground. Well, a lot of people don't really realize there is a spiritual connection in the human realm of the body when it comes to the male seed. In other words, what we call sperm in our modern language. Okay. So that was verse 9, what he was doing. Verse 10, and the thing which he did, what Onan now does, displeased Jehovah. Wherefore he, Jehovah, slew him also. That's how the first two sons of Yehuda ended up deceased. The first two sons. All right. You do not go against Yah's rules. If you do, you put your life at risk towards death. So that's how they died. So then, that was, like I said, verse 10. And he slew him also. And I was just going to read up to verse 10, but just to say verse 11 right here. Then said Yehuda to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at your father's house. So he sends her to that is Tamar, to her father's house, her biological father, until it says till Sheila, my son, be grown up. In other words, because he was very young, he could not enter into a marriage yet. Okay, for he said, lest peradventure, which means perhaps, he die also as his brothers did. And Tamar went and lived in her father's house. So that's when later we already read the other verses later of how she played the harlot, of whoredom, and slept with her father-in-law, Yehuda, who is Yehuda, who became guilty. Now back to chapter 46. Going back to chapter 46, I gave you all this history, and to relate to what the list of the sons are. The list of the sons and their children and their children's children. So we're back to chapter 46 in Genesis. And I just read to you the account having to do with Phares and Zerah, and all of that, and and Onan in verse 12. And I have here in verse 42, when it says and Onan died in the land of Canaan, I have a notation. In sin, they died because in sin, they spilled their seed. That's what they did. In sin, they spilled their seed on the ground. And then El killed them. El killed them. That's why we had to read Genesis 38, verses 7 to 10. Now, verse 13. Now then it says, the sons of Issachar were Tola and Puvah and Job. The Job that you read about in the scriptures, that has a whole book in his name. And then Shimron, it says, and also Shimron. That's verse 13. And then it says in verse 14, now it lists the sons of Zebulun with Sered and Elon and Yaleel. Yaleel. Now, verse 15. These, now, after all these names were given, these be the sons of Leah. Leah is the second wife to Jacob after he married Rachel. Okay, so these are the sons of Leah, which she bore to Jacob in Pandanaram, and his daughter Dinah, and all the souls of his sons and his daughters were 30 and 3, meaning 33 of Leah, though, of Leah's descendants, of Leah. Okay, but don't forget, Dinah was a twin sister of Zebulun that you read about in Genesis 29 and 30 or whatever. Now, verse 16. Now it lists the sons of Gad with Ziphion and Haggai and Shuni and Esbon, Eri and Erodi and Ereli. So look at these sons, the sons of Gad. Okay, continuing. Now, verse 17. And the sons of Asher, that's the next son, were Jimnah and Ishua and Ishui and Beriah and Zerah, their sister. And Zerah is their sister. And then the sons of Beriah, Beri, is Eber and Malshiel. Malshiel. Okay. So here's that list, all having to do with Asher. Okay. Now, then it says in verse 18, these, as this current list that I'm reading, these are the sons of Zilpah. All right. Remember, there was Bilhah and Zilpah. All right. Zilpah was a concubine wife to Jacob. Okay. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter. She was a servant to Leah as a secondary concubine wife. And then these she bore to Jacob 16 souls. Gives the count. Now, verse 19. Now, the sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, were Yoseph and Benjamin. Those two. Okay. Then verse 20 says, and to Yoseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh was the firstborn, and basically they were twins. Manasseh and Ephraim was the secondborn, which Aseneth, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore to him, to Joseph. Now, verse 21, in Egypt, that is, they were born. And the sons of Benjamin, look at this list, Benjamin, Bela and Becher and Ashbel and Gera and Naaman and Ehi and Rosh, Muppim and Huppim and Ard. They were 10. Benjamin had 10 sons. And these are the sons, now it says in verse 22, of Rachel, because Benjamin belonged to her, which were born to Jacob. So all the souls born to them numbered 14. Numbered 14. Okay, now verse 23. And the sons of Dan, now Hushim, that's all it lists, because Dan was wicked, okay? And Yah killed him as well. But either way, Hushim. Now verse 24. And now the sons of Naphtali are Yazil, Guni, Yezer, Shalim. These are the sons, though, when it's listing Naphtali, who was born through Bilhah. These are the sons of Bilhah, the secondary concubine wife of Jacob, which Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter. And she bore these to Jacob, and all the souls combined together were 7. Then verse 26, and all the souls that came, and they give this list because these were why we're reading this verse right now, verse 26, very important. All the souls that came with Jacob or Yaakov into Egypt, which came out of his loins by birth, in other words, besides Jacob's sons' wives, the wives that are listed, all the souls were 66. A score is 20. All right. So 3 times 20 is 60. And 6, so that meant 66. 66 souls. And then it says in verse 27, and the sons of Joseph, which were born to him in Egypt, were 2. That's Manasseh and Ephraim. And all the souls of the house, though, of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. So how do you get 66 and 70, which equals 70, in the count? The count had to do, it mentions Manasseh and Ephraim, there were just 2. It included Joseph himself and Asenath, his wife. That's what you need to see. It's the 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, plus Joseph and Asenath, which would make the count from 66 to 70. 70 that you're reading in verse 27. 70. That's how you get the count of 70. All right. Now continuing in verse 28. And he sent Yehuda. Remember, Yehuda took the lead in reference to Benjamin. Okay. He sent Yehuda before him to Yoseph to direct his face to Goshen. And which means, the name Goshen means to draw near. And they came into the land of Goshen now. Now, verse 29. So Joseph made ready his chariot. He went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen, and presented himself to him, to Yaakov. Joseph is presenting himself. And he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Can you imagine that reunion between Yaakov and Yosef, whom the brothers lied about Yosef being dead, and now he knows that he's alive, and they're embracing each other. That's why it makes the statement. I mean, I want you to think about that. Envision this. It says, wept on his neck a good while. While everybody else is sitting in wagons or standing or whatever they're doing. And even the Egyptians that were witnessing this, they all observed this reunion. And that's a picture of us. When we are going to be reunited with the Father, our supreme head over the universe, and Yeshua, there's going to be a joy that is incomparable. A joy that's incomparable. All right. So now verse 30. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. But Joseph said in verse 31 to his brethren, or the brothers, and to his father's house, the family, I will go up and show Pharaoh and say to him, to Pharaoh, my brothers are and my father's house, family, which are in the land of Canaan, are now come to me. They have now finally arrived. They're come to me. And the men, verse 32, are shepherds. So he wants this to be disclosed to the Pharaoh. The men are shepherds, for their trade has been to feed cattle. And they have brought their flocks and their herds. Cattle is also including, obviously, sheep, their flocks and their herds. and all that they have brought. Verse 33, and it shall come to pass when Pharaoh shall say to you, he's saying this to his father and his brothers, that you shall say, I'm sorry, that Pharaoh shall call you, and he's telling for them what to say. And when he says, and shall say to you, what is your occupation? Verse 34, that you shall say, meaning to the Pharaoh, your servant's trade has been about cattle from our youth, from our beginning of our lives, and even until now, both we and also our fathers, of the ancestors, also of our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, I've got a detailed commentary about this. Every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. The word abominations, 8441 in the Hebrew. 8441 in the Hebrew. The term abomination can be understood as loathsome, unclean, and repulsive. Are you getting this? Abomination itself, 8441 in the Hebrew. It means to be loathsome, unclean, and repulsive. And it's repulsive to El, or God. That's what the Egyptians believed. That's the way they accepted or would not accept a shepherd. Now, here's my detailed commentary. Please listen to this. Because their religious beliefs didn't allow hair, like the hair on your head, beards, your beards on your face, even eyebrows, okay, to grow. You may want to write all this down, to grow anywhere on their bodies. Was not allowed. I'm going to stop there just for a second or two, and that's this. That's why you see Egyptian paintings. You see the men and the women with wigs, and you don't see hair on their bodies. All the Egyptian uh, uh, pictures of the past, they even show it in movies. Men and women had to wear wigs because they were bald-headed. No hair was allowed on the human body in Egypt. All right. So I'm stopping there for a second. Two, I said, and more than a second or two. So anywhere I say on their bodies, both on men and women. Both on men and women. They had to shave all their body hair off. Are you relating to this? They had to shave all their body hair off. This is why I got this reference, and we're going to look at it right now. This is why in Genesis 41, verse 11, hold your place in this chapter 46. You must look at this reference. Genesis 41, go back some pages here to show you something here. Okay, verse 11. So we already studied this previously in the previous part one, in part one. But look at this statement that Yah wanted me to explain to all of you in verse 11. So 41, verse 11. Look at this statement. It says this. Now, the butler is explaining this to the Pharaoh. All right, verse 11. The butler is explaining this, okay? Of Pharaoh, the butler of Pharaoh that poured wine for Pharaoh. We dreamed a dream, he says in verse 11. In one night, I and he, I meaning the butler, and he being the baker. Remember, the baker was hanged, right? Okay, and the butler was released and to serve Pharaoh again. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. Now, verse 12. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew servant, all right, to the captain of the guard, because he was in prison because Potiphar's wife lied against him and accused Joseph of rape. Remember that? So he's in prison, right? So he's referring to this Hebrew servant in prison, serving the captain of the guard. And we told him, verse 12, and he interpreted to us our dreams. That's the butler and the baker. To each man according to his dream did he interpret. Now, verse 13. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. It was fulfilled, right? So it was. Me and he restored, that is, he restored to my office. Me, he restored to my office. That's the butler, to his office, to pour wine for the Pharaoh. And him, the baker, he hanged. Right? So you know that history. Now, here's what you need to see. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They brought him in hastily or quickly out of the dungeon, out of the prison. Look what he did. He shaved himself. Are you seeing that? Joseph shaved himself and then changed his garments or his clothing and then came into Pharaoh. Joseph had to appear before the Pharaoh shaven. He had to shave all the hair off his body. He became bald-headed, no eyebrows, no beard. Think about that. Now I go back to my commentary. After you see that background about Joseph, he shaved himself. I go back to chapter 46 in my commentary when I gave the reference of Genesis 41, 11 through 14. Joseph shaved his hair off before he could come into Pharaoh's presence. Right. Think about this. Picture it in your mind. Of the in Pharaoh's presence, and also is why his brothers could not recognize him. Are you getting this? The brothers could not recognize him. All Hebrews had hair on their head. They had mustache, beard, you name it. All Hebrews. They would never shave their heads, okay? But he did so in order to come into Pharaoh's presence, and then ended up interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. And Pharaoh put a ring on Joseph's finger to be the second most powerful in the land, in the ancient land of Egypt that ruled the world. He was second, all right, as the governor. That's why his brothers could not recognize him. He looked just like an Egyptian. He looked just like an Egyptian. That's why I have this other reference. We're in 46 still, but the other reference that you must see is Genesis 42. We have to go back now to that chapter. A few verses there. Genesis 42. Look at this account about Joseph. In Genesis 42, beginning in verse 3. We're going to read 3 through 8. Look at this account, please. It says, and Joseph's, this is chapter 42 now of Genesis, and verse 3. And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob, sent not with his brethren, For he said, Jacob said, lest peradventure or perhaps mischief, which is 611 in the Hebrew, mischief means evil, you see, or harm. Lest evil or harm would befall Benjamin, him. So he would not send Benjamin. Now, verse 5, and the sons of Israel, though, they came to buy corn among those, that is, others that also came to Egypt, that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Verse 6, and Joseph was governor over the land. And he that sold, it says here, he that sold to all the people of the land. Joseph did this. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed themselves. Remember when we studied that? What that meant? When they bowed themselves. Remember Joseph's dreams when he was a young teenager under his father's house? And he had these dreams of a sheaf. Remember, his sheaf stood upright, and all the brothers' sheaves bowed down to Joseph's dream, sheaf rather, in the dream. That was the fulfillment of the prophecy that Joseph was given when Joseph came, and they, the brothers now, they're giving reverence. It says bow. The word bowed is 7812 in the Hebrew. 7812. And the word bow down means to give reverence to a superior. And it would be any king, any pharaoh, or any queen, to give reverence to a superior. When they bowed themselves down before him, and their faces were to the earth. Their faces were to the earth. Now, the reference to that about the sheaves is in Genesis 37, 6 through 8. Genesis 37. So hold your place. Hold your place. We're going to go back a few pages here. Genesis 37, 6 through 8. This is the account of Joseph's dreams. Okay. We've already studied this previously in part 1 or so. But in this particular section, 37, 6 through 8, verse 6 says, Genesis 37, verse 6, and he said to them, his family, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. Joseph dreamt. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, in the land of their farmland. And lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, standing up, his sheaf. And behold, your sheaves, he's saying to his brothers, stood round about to surround mine, and made obeisance. In the Hebrew, 7812, obeisance means to bow before. Made obeisance means to bow before, to my sheaf, Joseph says. And his brethren, verse 8, said to him, shall you indeed reign or rule over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion, authority over us? And they, the whole of the family, hated him yet the more for his Joseph dreams and for his words, his explanation. So that's the background reference. As I turn there back to Genesis 46 right now, as I'm going through these verses, and to explain what was taking place in reference to what the experience was having to do with his brothers, and why they were having to bow before him, and why they could not recognize him. Okay. And it's why his brothers, I said, could not recognize him, because Joseph, looked like an Egyptian. He looked just like an Egyptian. Smooth skin, no hair, no beard, no mustache, bald headed, with a wig. All right. And that's why Joseph didn't speak. Remember when they appeared and he recognized them and they couldn't recognize him? He used his steward as an interpreter. He didn't even let them hear his voice, but they could see his face, but he would speak privately to the steward and have the steward speak directly to his brothers. Okay, so that's the background there. And what I have here in verse 34, this is the last verse of chapter 46 before we get in verse chapter 47, is this. Um, the word shepherds in verse 34, for every shepherd is an abomination. The word shepherd is 7462 in the Hebrew. 7462 and also 6629. I'm going to give you both. I'm giving you two numbers, but I'm going to give you 7462 first, which means to graze and feed flocks. To graze them on the land, on farmland, and to feed them, right? And the other number is 6629. And 6629 in the Hebrew, when it's talking about shepherd now, is a flock of sheep. That's what that term is. 6629, that number. A flock of sheep. And he even says in the Hebrew dictionary, it says this, figuratively, it means this flock of sheep literally means of the children of Israel as sheep. It literally says it that way, of the children of Israel as sheep. Okay, so that was an abomination, like I said, to the Egyptians. So that's the background meaning of all of this, is why I had to give you all these details and all these verses and these scriptures and the meanings of these words. Now we enter the final chapter, chapter 47. All right, chapter 47, beginning verse 1. So then Yoseph came and told Pharaoh. This is also very interesting. Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren or brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen now. See, remember the land of Goshen was given to them, okay? And he took, verse 2, he took some of his brethren, that is 5 of them, some, that's why it says some, 5 men, and presented them to Pharaoh. Verse 2. Verse 3. So Pharaoh now says to his brethren, what is, because Joseph told them previously, he's going to ask the question about your occupation. All right. So what is your occupation? Pharaoh says to the brethren, to the brothers. And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds. That's that 6629 that represents Israel. Both we and also our fathers of the past, of their ancestry, our father and also our fathers. So they said, verse 4, moreover to Pharaoh, is for us, meaning to sojourn in the land. Sojourn is number 1481. 1481, that is to dwell. It's for us to dwell in the land, meaning Goshen, are we come. For your servants have no pasture for their flocks of land, to graze in and all of that. For the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Well, sore is 3515 in the Hebrew. The famine is sore, meaning it is heavy and great. Heavy and great. Sore means heavy and great in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, we pray you, they're speaking this to Pharaoh, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. That's where Joseph was setting up, in the land of Goshen. So Pharaoh, verse 5, spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brethren are come to you, Joseph, right? The land, verse 6, of Egypt is before you. It's in your presence. In the best. That's 4315 in the Hebrew. 4315. In the best means the best in quality. that land, Goshen, the best in quality. It says, make your father and your brethren to dwell, meaning there. For in the land of Goshen, that is, this is all verse 6, let them dwell, live there. And if you, that means it's Pharaoh speaking to Joseph now, remember? He said, and if you, Joseph, know any men of activity. He's asking this question. Any men of activity. The word activity is number 2428 in the Hebrew. If you know any men of strength, that's what it means in the Hebrew. Any men activity means strength, and it also means influence. Men of strength and influence. If you know, Joseph, if you know any of your people among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. What? To have Hebrews, that have shepherds that the Egyptians look at as an abomination? The Pharaoh is asking Joseph to have some of his influence men to be rulers, he says, over my cattle. In other words, Pharaoh had learned, this is my commentary, based on these words, based on this scripture. Pharaoh had learned about El's blessings under Joseph and Jacob. He became a believer, even though he's the Pharaoh, okay? Shepherds are an abomination. He's asking Joseph to provide men of strength and influence to take care of his cattle, okay? All right? So Pharaoh had learned of El's blessings under Yoseph and Jacob. That's what you need to understand in that verse 6. Now, verse 7. So Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and presented him before the Pharaoh. That's in the presence of the Pharaoh. In the presence, that's all these. Every time you see the word before, is 6440 in the Hebrew. It means in the face of or in the presence of. So he presents Jacob, his father, in the presence of the Pharaoh. Now look what happens in verse 7. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Are you seeing that? He blessed Pharaoh. That is 1288 in the Hebrew, Baruch. That is a blessing that can only come from Yah. All right? As far as spiritually it's concerned. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and when Jacob referred to his father, his own father, he was referring to as El did with Abram. As El also did, when he was blessing Pharaoh, he was referring to as El did with his ancestor, with his father, Jacob, his father, and El did with Abram that we read about in Genesis 12, a couple of verses there. All right. So hold your place. And there's only 2 verses to read. Genesis 12. Look at Genesis 12, the first couple of verses. You know this account, how many times we've studied it in the past. But Genesis 12, the first 2 verses says this, and you're going to remember, now the Lord, 3068, Yehovah that is, had said to Abram, get you out of your country and from your kindred family and from your father's house, that's the family, to the land that I will show you. Yah is going to lead Abram, okay, to a different location, a different land that I will show you. Now, verse 2. Now, while we had to study this, Yah is saying, will make of you a great nation. To Abram, I will bless you. That's 1288, Baruch, and make your name great. The name became from Abram to Abraham. He changed his name. That's all in this chapter. And you shall be or the blessing. You shall be the blessing. That's 1293, which is the root for 1288, to be blessed. It can only come from Yah. So the rest of the chapter gives all the details, even about Sarai, whose name was changed to Sarah. Okay, but we're not going to read all of that. I just wanted to show you that he was to be blessed, Abraham into Abraham, and he's comparing that. That is, Yaakov is blessing the Pharaoh. He's blessing. So when I'm reading this verse here, and when it says that Jacob blessed the Pharaoh, and I put the commentary, as El did with Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant. That's what it became. The Abrahamic covenant that we read about in Genesis 12, 1 to 2. Okay, and the rest of the verses that follow, but we didn't read those. Okay, the Abrahamic covenant. So the blessing has to do with covenant. That's my point. All right, the blessing upon Pharaoh has to do with a covenant. So Pharaoh says to Jacob now, verse 8, how old are you? He's asking Jacob his age. How old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage. In the Hebrew is 4033. 4033. The term pilgrimage literally translates as dwelling place. 4033. 4033 in the Hebrew. It means a dwelling place when it says pilgrimage. So Jacob is explaining to the Pharaoh the days of the years of my dwelling place or pilgrimage are, look at the rest of the verse, 130 years. Up to that point, 130 years. Then he says, few and evil have the days of the years of my life. Few and evil. The word few is 4592 in the Hebrew. It means a short time, literally. It says that in the dictionary. It means when he said few, it's a short time, he said. Well, he's about to compare something, all right? When he says short, a short time. And evil is 7451, which I've translated before in previous the parts of this study. And evil is Ra, R-A in the it's in having to do with a false god of the Egyptians, of ancient empires in Egypt also. So evil have the days of the years of my life. So the word years, he says, have been the days of the years of my life. The word years is 8141 in the Hebrew. 8141 of the years literally can be understood as a division of time. So my years, he's saying, as far as the years of my life as a division of time have been, of my life, that we'll continue to read verse 9, of my life have been and have not attained. Now look at the rest of his statement. Have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers. Okay. Have not attained is 5381 in the Hebrew. 5381. The word attain means reached. So his years of his life have not reached, that is, to the days of the years of the life of my fathers, of his ancestors, in the days of their pilgrimage. So it's the same number of their pilgrimage, 4033, of their dwelling places. Okay, so now I have this commentary that I must read. When Jacob is saying all of this, he has not reached the days and years or the vision of time of his fathers, of his ancestors. He's 130 presently, right? But they have not reached the years that they have lived. They have not reached, his years have not reached the years of his fathers of the past. All right. So what was Yaakov saying? What was he revealing? Yaakov revealed his life was short in comparison to the years of his ancient fathers. Don't forget, they lived hundreds of years, way more than 130 that he was at the present time in that age. They lived. So he's making this statement that his time of life was short in comparison to that, to the years of his fathers. Only if evil, then Yah will remove. Only if evil, evil meaning if evil would not be able to attain to the former years of his fathers. Only if evil, then Yah will remove. What did that mean? The reference that it gave in the dictionary is Ezekiel 20. Ezekiel 20 is these verses that you must see as a prophecy. Ezekiel 20, verse 33. We've got to look at that. So Ezekiel chapter 20. Oh, there's a whole chapters and chapter after chapter in the book of Ezekiel, because Ezekiel, the prophet, had a special calling to deal with the tribes of Israel. So in this specific chapter, as a reference, in Ezekiel 20, looking at this set of verses right here, beginning verse 33, please look at this with me. In verse 33, it says this. It says, my heading says, God punishes but forgives. All right. Now, verse 33, as I live, says Yehovah El, surely with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and with fury or anger poured out, will I rule over you. Yah is going to do certain things to people or to tribes or is as Israel, that Yah has purposed a covenant and he's going to rule. All right. I will rule over you. Verse 34. And I will bring you out from the people and will gather you out of the countries. That's why they ended up scattered all over the earth, out of the countries wherein you are scattered. That's what it says right there. With a mighty hand, though, he will do that. And with a stretched out arm and with fury, that is anger poured out. Now, verse 35, and I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face. Both numbers are used, 6440, in the presence of. Face to face. You use it twice. I will plead with you. Verse 36, like as I pleaded with your fathers in the wilderness. Where? Of the land of Egypt. Okay, when they were in bondage. So will I plead with you, he says to Israel. This is a different Israel, though. Says Yehovah of the Elohim. Now, verse 37. And I will cause you, Israel, the new Israel, to pass under the rod of authority. And I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. You see, he made a covenant with Abraham, right? That covenant with Isaac, right? A covenant. He made the same covenant with Yaakov. The bond of the covenant is about the covenant. And I will purge out, verse 38. I will purge out from among you the rebels. That's what Yah did then in their history. And guess what? He's doing the exact same thing in any assembly in this modern day of the last days, when people are being given the opportunity of salvation and they're hearing the teachings, they're hearing the words. Yah judges all of that. And it is Yah that will remove people from even an assembly. Yah is doing that, not the leader, not Mel Spearman, myself. It's Yah doing it. So he says, I will purge out from among you the rebels and them that them that transgress against me. I will bring them forth out of the countries where they sojourn or live or travel, and they shall not enter into the land of Israel. That's prophetic, into the land of Israel in the future. You shall know that I am Jehovah. You're going to know it. As for you, O house of Israel, thus says Jehovah Elohim, go you, and he says this, okay, go you and serve everyone his idols. That's exactly what people are doing. Serving their idols, the things that they elevate, that they are involved with. Okay, everyone is idols, and hereafter also, in the future, if you will not hearken to me, but pollute you my holy name, you're supposed to be representing the creator of the Elohim, all that of Israel, the family, his holy name. You're polluting it. He says, you my holy name, no more with your gifts. What you present to me, your gifts, and with your idols in your idolatrous practices. Don't present yourselves in that life to me that way. Now, verse 40, for in my holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, says Jehovah of the Elohim, there shall all the house of Israel and all of them in the land serve me. In the future, they're going to have to serve me. There will I accept them, and there will I require your offerings and the first fruits of your oblations, and with all your holy things. There, all right. There will he accept it. Now, verse 41. But I will accept, he says, I will accept you with your sweet savor when I bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries wherein you have been scattered. Yah did that. That's why they are, as tribes of Israel, they are no longer in the Middle East. The ones that label themselves as the people in the Middle East, they're not the people. You see, they came out of false religions to accept the Hebrew covenant, so to speak. But they're not the people. You have been scattered. I will be. But then he says, in the end of verse 41, I will be sanctified or set apart in you before in the presence of the heathen. That's the other nations. Verse 42, and you shall know that I am the Lord, or Yehovah in the Hebrew, when I shall bring you into the land of Israel. Now, what is he referencing when he says, you shall know? They don't know him now. That's what you need to see. You need to understand this, please. They do not know the true Yehovah. They know of a God that Satan has set up, but they don't know Yehovah. And when I will bring you into the land of Israel, that's in the future, into the country the which I lifted up my hand to give it to your fathers of the past. In verse 43, and there shall you remember your ways. In the future, this is all prophetic, and all your doings wherein you have been defiled. 2930, you've been polluted. All right? You've been polluted. And you shall, this is in the future, loathe yourselves. Remember how the Pharaoh, loathe, as that it means as far as an abomination? You shall loathe yourselves in your own sight. That's when you're going to begin to see yourself. Yah is going to open your mind and your eyes and to see yourself. For all, it says, in your own sight, for all your evils that you have committed. All right? Now, verse 44, last verse. And you shall know that it keeps saying it over and over again. You shall know. That's the future. That's the last days. That I am Yehovah when I have brought with you, I have brought, or not brought, but wrought, worked with you for my name's sake. His name that constitutes his being sanctified and being holy and all of that. My name's sake, not according, look what he expresses, to your wicked ways. It's not what you and I can decide. Yah doesn't accept any of that. We don't decide, do not decide how we want to worship the Most High. Yah will always reject that and refuse that. All right. So that's why it says, when I have worked with you for my name's sake, not according to your wicked ways and not according to your corrupt doings, your practices. O house of Israel, says Jehovah of the Elohim. So there's more, but I'm going to stop there in that particular verse. I got to get back. As I get back to chapter 47, where we were when I was reading this account, this is a prophecy. This is back to chapter 47 and verse 9. And at the end of it, about the pilgrimage. And when Yaakov revealed his life was short, okay, and that only if evil, then Yah will remove. You can be, in other words, you can be a part of Yah in a covenant relationship, but if there is evil, he will remove. That's what that verse was all about. It's a prophecy for the last days prophecy as well. He will remove. That's what he did with ancient Israel, and he's doing it today. He's doing it today in multiple situations, multiple assemblies. Same thing. Now, verse 10. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh. It keeps repeating that. Jacob blessed Pharaoh, baruched him. And Pharaoh went out from before, and he went out from before in the presence of Pharaoh. And then verse 11, Joseph placed his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, which was Goshen, okay? In the land of Egypt, in the best. That word best means, the fat of the land, in the best of the land, the fat of the land, in the land of Rameses, because it was once had that title. Goshen once had the title of Rameses, okay, as Pharaoh had commanded. Now, verse 12, and Joseph nourished his father and his brothers and all his father's household, 1004, but not family, all the family, with bread according to the numbers of their families. Okay. Now, verse 13, and there was no bread. Look at this statement, in all the land. When it's referencing the land at 776, is referring to all the earth. There was no bread in all the land, meaning of the earth, for the famine was very sore, not just sore like the previous verse, very sore. And that is 3:5:1:5 in the Hebrew. It was very great and very grievous, in other words. So that the land of Egypt, still in verse 13, and the land of Canaan fainted, it says, by reason of the famine. The word fainted, 3856 in the Hebrew. In its dictionary and concordance, it says a deterioration, deterioration of people, though. All right, deterioration of people because of hardship and oppression. When it says they fainted, a deterioration of people because of hardship and oppression. That's what it means in the Hebrew. Now, verse 14. So Yoseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan. All the money for the corn, though, for the grain, which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. So they had to pay for it, right? Now, verse 15. Look what happens. All the money, right? Verse 15 says, and when the money failed, you see that? It was the end of their money, the end of their resources. When the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, well, give us bread, for why should we die? The Egyptians are saying this to Joseph. Why should we die in your presence? You're the governor, you're in control, all right? Why should we die in your presence? For the money failed. That is, it was used up. The word failed there, number 656 in the Hebrew, means it was used up. It was ended. There was no more money, okay, that they could use. So now look what happens. Verse 16. So Joseph said, well, give your cattle. No money? All right, give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if the money fails. If the money fails, which it did, the word cattle in the Hebrew 4735, it can be understood 4735. When he asked for the cattle, it means a source of wealth. Because in ancient times, if you own animals, sheep, cattle, goats, whatever, you were considered wealthy if you had numbers of them. And that was the wealth as it was being interpreted then in ancient time. Now, verse 17. So they brought their cattle to Joseph. All right. So now they're giving Joseph the cattle. And Joseph gave them bread in exchange. Look what it says. In exchange for horses and for the flocks and for the cattle of the herds and for the asses or donkeys. And then he fed them with bread for all their cattle or their wealth of that year. So that was the exchange. They had no more money, so they had to give their wealth of cattle, right? And then it gives a list. Interesting, isn't it? Horses and flocks and cattle of the herds and asses and all that, donkeys, whatever. Now, verse 18. So when that year ended, of that particular year, when they had to do that, they came to him in the second year, to Joseph. And they said to him, we will not hide from my Lord. That's 113. That's Yosef. He's the master. He's the head. We will not hide from my master how that our money is spent. My Lord also has our herds of wealth, of cattle, which means wealth. And there is not aught, which means there is nothing left. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord, that's Joseph, but only, look what they say, our bodies and our lands. Our bodies and our lands. Okay, now verse 19. So wherefore shall we die then? Before your eyes, Joseph, both we and our land? They're asking that question. It's a question mark. Both we and our land? It says, by us now. They offered themselves. By us as human beings. By us and our land for bread. And then we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh. Buying us, all right? Will be servants to Pharaoh, who is the authority. And then they say, give us seed then. Seed to, in other words, to plant, that we may live and not die, and that the land be not desolate. Desolate always means that there is no inhabitants, that they all die off. So Joseph, verse 20 now, bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and for the Egyptians sold. Now it explains about the Egyptians themselves. They sold every man his field. They were selling it to Joseph, the Egyptians themselves, because the famine prevailed over them also, see. So the land became Pharaoh's. Now he's owning everything, even the people. Now, when I saw that part, as I was doing this study, preparing for this Shabbat, Yah put it right in my heart, right there. This was to picture the earth under Satan in the last days. What happened then to people of Egypt happened to Israelites, whoever of the land of Canaan, whoever they were. This is a picture that the earth, which is under Satan in the last days, is going to happen the same way, because they are already planning. They are already planning and they're working out when people, in fact, I just saw on the internet of a farmer for 3 generations. They put it on the internet. I just saw it this morning, okay, on the internet. This farmer for 3 generations, where the government is wanting to take his land, all right, for building of houses and other things and remove him from his farmland. That's been going on, but that's just one story that they just put on the internet. Okay, so here's the point that the famine, like I said, it's going to be in the last days. The picture Satan in the last days is happening now, right in our face. Verse 21. And as for the people, he removed them to cities. Oh, guess what? That's the history of the United States. When it was mostly 90% of people living on farmland, where do people live now? On farmland? No. The majority of the population of the United States, as well as other countries, they live in suburbs, in cities. That's why it says he removed them to cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end thereof. Oh, this is all prophetic. Now, verse 22, only the land, oh, yes, you got to hear this. Only the land of the priests bought he not. Ah, that's the religious side. Only the land of the priests bought he not, for the priests had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them, the priest, okay? And they sold, wherefore they sold not their lands to take it. Well, guess what? Yah showed me that. When I read that section about the priests, you and I know in our cultures right now, under Satan's system, his false religions are protected to keep their lands in the last days. All these ministries out there that they have land. That's where their what they call churches. That's where their churches are located, and they're protected. In other words, the land of churches are protected under Satan's false government system, and that's what you need to relate to. And let me get this stupid thing off my screen. All right, I got it. I had to remove something from my system here. All right, now another distraction. But here's the point I'm making right now about what happened in the past and what was happening even with the priest. It is a fulfillment today, and that false religious systems are protected in their lands of where they meet for their false religious worship. Of their false religious worship. That's being fulfilled right now. We're witnessing all this. Now, verse 23. So then Yoseph said to the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Pharaoh represents Satan. Okay, when you think about the term, okay, here is seed for you, seed to plant, and you shall sow, which means to plant in the land. So Joseph, as Pharaoh's governor of Egypt's systems, though, is having to give them seed in order to plant in the land. And verse 24 says, and it shall come to pass in the increase. I'm giving you seed to plant, but in whatever you increase from harvesting in your land, look what it says here. In the increase, it says that you shall give the fifth part to Pharaoh. That's 20%. In other words, the fifth and the 4 parts of the 80% shall be your own for the seed of the field that was given, the seed that was presented, and for your food, and for them of your households or families, and for food for your little ones. It emphasizes little ones. Well, that's symbolic as well. 2945 is is the number in the Hebrew dictionary. Your little ones, 2945. It can be understood as your future, meaning your little ones, your future that represents L's family of eternity. L's family of eternity. Your little ones for your future. Verse 25. So they said, you have saved our lives, meaning Yoseph. You, Yoseph, have saved our lives. Let us find grace. Oh, so now it's about grace. That can only come from Yah. Okay. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord or Master. Grace. And we will be Pharaoh's servants. That's what the picture is. Okay. There is a false grace that is in our culture. And to be belong to Pharaoh is of Satan. But there's more to this. I've got to share with you. And then Joseph made it a law, verse 26, over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth, 20%, except the land. Okay. That's 7535 when it says except. 7535 can be understood as only. The fifth, meaning only the land of the priest only. Okay, only the land of the priest is not going to be taken. And it says became not Pharaoh's. Are you seeing that? Only the land of the priests became not Pharaoh's. Didn't belong to Pharaoh. So these are symbols of tyrants over else people. Tyrants over else people. When you're dealing with Pharaoh, and wait till I get into next Sabbath, number 48, chapter 48, 49, and 50, where you're going to understand about the symbol of which is the Pharaoh. Who is the Pharaoh? And there's another symbol as to who is the lion. Who is the lion? Lion. Okay, and I'm going to show you two different descriptions in the scriptures about the term lion. Okay, now that's next Sabbath though. Now verse 27. So my heading says Jacob's last wish. So Israel, verse 27, dwell in the land, it says, of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. And they had possessions therein. And they grew and multiplied exceedingly. Are you seeing that term? And when it says multiplied exceedingly, and the meaning of that, when it says multiplied exceedingly, it was as Yah's covenant people, who is Israel. That's described in Genesis 28, when it says they multiplied exceedingly. This is the reference, in other words. Genesis 28, verse 10. So let's look at that. Hold your place in this final segment here. But look at now, Genesis 28 is a description when it says multiplied exceedingly. Genesis 28, verse 10. Start there. Look at this account. It says in verse 10, and Jacob or Yaakov went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and remained there all night because the sun was set. You see that when the sun goes down? Okay, a new day begins, there's darkness. And so he took of the stones of that place, put them for his pillows, to use it as pillows. And he lay down in that place to sleep. That's verse 11. Now, verse 12, I got this circle. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder. was set up on the earth, and the top of it, the ladder reached to heaven. And behold, the angels, okay, of God, or the Elohim, ascending upon that ladder and descending on it, up and down. Angels, okay? And the account of that is in John, the Gospel of John 1. Hold your place. A couple of verses there. The angels. There's an example that Yeshua uses in John, the Gospel of Johanan or John, and it says this. In John 1, 50 to 51 says, Yeshua answered and said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under, and this had to do with Philip, by the way. I saw you under, I believe it was Philip. Let me see. Well, it shows Philip and Nathaniel. So he's speaking to his disciples, and he says, because I saw you under the fig tree, and you believe that, you shall see greater things than these. He's telling Nathaniel and Philip. And he said to him, verse 51, truly, truly, I say to you, Yeshua is teaching this, hereafter, in the future, in other words, you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. He was quoting what you are and I are reading in Genesis 28. The same teaching of the angels that he gave this dream to who? To Jacob of the covenant people. So that was verse 12. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it, that ladder. Now, verse 13. And behold, the Lord stood above it. So we're talking about a heavenly vision of a future fulfillment. He stood above it and said, I am Yehovah of the Elohim, God of Abraham, your father, and the God or Elohim of Isaac. And it says, the land whereon you lie right now, to you will I give it, and to your seed. That's your offspring in the future. Verse 14, and your seed shall be as the dust of the earth. Now, that's dirt, dust, which you and I can't count. The dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. In every direction you're going to spread. And in you and in your seed, that's your offspring, shall all the families now of the earth be blessed. Now, it's not just Israel. He says all the families of the earth. That's every nation. All be blessed, though, be baruched. And then verse 15, it says, and behold, I am with you. This is in the dream now, the vision. I am with you, Jacob, and will keep you in all the places where you go, and will bring you again into this land. For I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken to you. Yah is supernatural. They can do anything and decide anything. All right, verse 16. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, well, surely it's Yehovah is in this place. And I didn't know it or understand it. Verse 17. And he was afraid, as it says here. How dreadful is this place? This is none other, the place he's referring to, but the house of God. Yah's residence, the house. And this is the gate of heaven to lead to heaven. You being in the house, which is the family, and leading us, the family, into heaven, okay, of heaven, the gate to heaven. And Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put as his pillows. He set up upon a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. Bethel in the Hebrew literally translate as a house. Bet is house, and El is El of God, the house of God. Okay. So I think that was all that I needed to read in that set of verses as I look at my notes here. And okay. All right, now um all right, so back to Genesis 47 and about with the Pharaoh in his relationship with the Joseph, and it was Jacob's last wish in verse 27. Yah's covenant people of Israel are to be a part of that plan, to be taken up into the realm of Yah in the city. Verse 28, so Jacob lived, it says here, in the land of Egypt 17 years, meaning more. Remember, he was 130. Remember that 130 years when the Pharaoh asked him his age. He says, I'm presently 130, but he lived 17 more years, so that the whole or the complete age of Jacob was 147 years. Because if you add 17 to 130, you come up with 147. All right. Verse 29, it says, and the time drew near that Israel must die. All right. Now he reached his 147th year, and he called his son Yoseph and said to him, if now I have found grace in your sight, put, I pray you, your hand under my thigh. They had that custom in ancient times. Always when a person was told to put the hand under the thigh is where the seed is, the seed of man, which we call sperm. Okay, just being plain in these days. The thigh represented the seed that is to be planted for life. All right. Hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me, he says. Bury me not, I pray you, in Egypt. Don't leave me here, but I will lie with my fathers. Okay, bury with my fathers. And you, Joseph, shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in that burial place that Abraham had purchased. Remember the burial place? And he that said, I will do as you have said. He, Joseph, that is, said, I will do to his, he said this to his father, as you have said, as you have commanded. And he, verse 31, said to Yosef, that is he, Yaakov, said to Yosef, swear to me. And he swore to him. When you swore a covenant, and that became a covenant. He swore to him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. He became deceased. Israel became deceased. So look at all of this that we have studied today and the details of this. And Yah is revealing all of this to us in these last days. Whoever are the hearers, whoever are paying attention, whoever will listen and agree, Yah will protect, he will bless, he will provide. They will do that. But we must submit. We must yield ourselves. No matter what is happening in our lives, no matter what is happening around us, between the existence of humanity, Yah is in charge of all things to be fulfilled, though. The problem with humanity today is they don't want to accept what Yah has promised, what Yah has designated, what Yah has commanded. And they want to interpret or make up their own faith, their own beliefs. That's where the error is coming in human lives, with human beings. So we need to keep that in mind and learn to accept what the Most High has designated. So I'm going to close out this service right now. in prayer. And I just hope that you will join in again to part 4, and it will be the last 3 chapters of Genesis, chapter 48 and 49 and 50. And then we'll go in to actually the testaments of Yoseph, because that's what the title has been anyway, the testament of Yoseph. But it's going to be in the writings in the lost books, in the writings of the lost books, as well as probably in the Apocrypha. So we'll cover that in the future, probably in a couple to 2 to 3 weeks. We'll be in that section. All right, so let us pray and praise our Yah. Heavenly Father, Yehovah Yahweh. Yes, we are praising you right now. You, our Father, we belong to you. You don't belong to us. It's not the opposite, the way Satan has deceived people to believe that Satan is in charge of you. And that's what he's teaching in all his false religious systems. But you are in charge of us. You are the supreme head. That's what we need to relate to as the head of the family of the Elohim of Israel. And you will be that head forever and ever and ever into eternity. And we are to be given glorified bodies in the near future, step by step, you know, in segments, so to speak, not all at once. It will be the first fruits, the firstborn of the 144,000 that I keep referring to as the firstborn, as the first fruits of that. And then obviously, if there's first fruits, there's a second fruits, there's a third fruits, whatever. There is an order of who you will reach out to and invite for your kingdom realm. So we thank you for that, Father, for that perfect plan of salvation. But we are grateful for the Shabbats. And we are blessed when we observe it, when we keep it the right way, when we worship you on it and hear your words, though. We have to pay attention and listen to what you are revealing. And these are prophetic meanings in the scriptures of the meaning of words that portray our last days generation. And so we thank you now for the blessing of what we are going to have as a Sabbath meal. You know, as we have our customary feast, we ask you to bless us in our temples, the bodies of your spirit, and that we give you the praise and remember that you are the source of whatever we are provided as a Sabbath feast. We thank you even for that. And we ask it, Father, and not only for us, for all your people, wherever they're located on the four corners of this earth that are observing the Sabbath, whatever meals that they are going to engage in, that you be with them and bless them. But now, Father, we thank you for what you have given spiritually and physically. And we say all of these things in the name of our Savior and soon coming King Yehoshua. And we say, hallelujah, amen. Hallelujah, amen. And for those, once again, that are hearing the word through this ministry, we say shalom, shalom, until we meet again, Yah willing. And for those of you online, be blessed throughout the remainder of the Shabbat and through this forthcoming week.